Interestingly, it was 6 years ago to the day I stepped in this pulpit for the first time on Sunday morning as the local preacher for the Bremen Church of Christ. In some ways, it seems like that just was a few weeks ago, and in some ways, it just feels like we've been part of the family here as long as we can remember. But I'm a little offended at getting flowers or anything. Anniversary, you know. But it occurred to me, this is the first time it's fallen on a Sunday. July 1st, 2012 was on a Sunday, and if I'm not mistaken, I don't think we've had a July 1st fall on an actual Sunday since then. So that's interesting. But to the day, 6 years, and so we are just, I say it all the time, but I can't say it enough, just very thankful to be a part of the family here, and we love everybody, and just can't say enough about how good the congregation has been to us here. Also, we leave, Lord willing, tomorrow for camp. So, Reagan and I and several of our young people, we've got the van packed out, so we'll be at camp. There's one thing I tell people that as much as I love camp, the one drawback for Camp McCroy is it's so far out in the middle of nowhere, we can't get a cell signal. So Joyce helped me remember before I go, and I will leave there's a phone in the kitchen there. And so should something come up, I always tell people you can leave me a voicemail, and usually once every other day or so I'll get somebody's phone. If you have Verizon out there, you can get one little bar. And so I'll borrow somebody's phone just long enough to check voicemail and make sure everything's okay. I hadn't had somebody leave a voicemail or something, but there is a phone in the kitchen that you can call as well. But we're looking forward to that. Always enjoy camp every year. It's interesting because camp is tough in many ways. It's tiring, but it's just one of my favorite things to do. I just love so much getting to spend time with the young folks, but also the work that we do there, and getting to see a lot of preacher friends and stuff too. I hope everybody got a handout. This is the first Sunday of the month. I said all that about camp also to say that what a challenge it is to keep my OCD wanted to stay on schedule the first Sunday of the month and do science and the Bible. These lessons are challenging. I feel like in some ways they're not as challenging because Brother Wayne Jackson, I lean very heavily on his book, Science and the Bible, and in some ways he's done the legwork and some of that, but there's also, research you want to do on your own as well, and these are they're challenging to put together. I feel like the handout these because they're a little more technical, so the handout takes extra time. It's just they're sometimes a little bit of a bear to put together. I brought a handout with me so that I can hopefully, I want to try to make sure, because sometimes when the handout's a little bit different from my notes, I may forget something, so I'm going to try to avoid that. But we're talking, as you see here, this month about anatomy, physiology. You see on your handout there, if you have that handout, I think there are still a few in the back if you want to go back and grab one from Brother Robert. He's back there and has those extras. But anatomy is the study of the structure of the various parts of the human body, whereas physiology is the study of the action of the components of the human anatomy. So they're very closely related, but sometimes you'll see a class that's labeled anatomy. Sometimes you'll see a class that's labeled anatomy and physiology. But that's very similar terms, but there is a slight distinction. You probably are familiar with Psalm 139:14, where David says, "I will praise thee, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made." I think after we go through this lesson, which is just going to touch the hem of the proverbial garment, that you will agree we are very fearfully and wonderfully made by an almighty creator. No, we did not evolve from lower forms of life. No way, no how. It is impossible that such could have happened. Much of what I'm saying tonight, or what I'm going to be talking about, is going to come, of course, as I mentioned, from Brother Jackson's book, Science and the Bible. Brother Jackson, back in 1993, and they updated it in 2000. There are 2 copies of it in our library, but there's a little book called The Human Body. I forgot the actual title. The Human Body, Design or Accident. It's something like that. And he really expands it. That whole book really covers anatomy and physiology as far as evidence of a divine, almighty creator. And it is fascinating. I feel like a broken record sometimes when I mention anything by Brother Wayne Jackson, but it is. Anything he writes, it seems like, is really, really top notch. And other people have written some good stuff, but that's just, he's one of those that it seems like everything I come across by him is just really, really good. So that's another good resource if you want to do a little further study on this particular subject. So, I wanted to mention 1 Corinthians 12:18. This is also in your handout in the introduction. 1 Corinthians 12:18, now hath God set the members, every one of them, in the body as it hath pleased him. That word set is sometimes used in the Bible of God's creative activity. He set the stars in the heavens there in Genesis 1. He set the bounds of the sea, Job 38 and verse 10. So it's often used of God's creative activity. Paul is using the human body as an illustration of congregational unity. And he says the congregation ought to be working together just like your body works in unison. And that's an evidence of God as the creator. And so I guess kind of the leading question is the final point there on the introduction. Is the human body an accident of nature, or is it a marvel of design? It's absolutely a marvel of design. It's a masterpiece of design. We're going to notice this in 4 different points. We'll spend the bulk of our time on the second one, as you can tell looking at your handout. But first of all, just look at the stunning organization that is evident within the human body. The body itself is a mini universe with amazing precision and organization. You know and I know that things left to themselves in nature tend toward disorganization. They tend to go toward chaos. Things left by themselves don't just get better. They don't improve. In fact, all of nature goes against the whole theory of evolution. Things may change a little bit, but they're not getting better. They tend to devolve, not evolve. Just leave your car alone. Don't ever change the oil. Don't ever service it and see what happens. It's not going to evolve into a Lamborghini or a Corvette or whatever. It's going to get worse and worse, and eventually it's just going to break down and stop. Things left to themselves tend toward disorganization. And so the organization of the body, the human body, argues for more than just mere nature. And that's what we're pointing out here. The evolutionist, George Simpson, Dr. George Simpson, he described the human body as, quote, the most highly endowed organization of matter that has yet appeared on the earth. And yet that same fellow, dead now, would have said it just appeared. It just evolved from apes, from lower life forms. There's no way, folks. The body has stunning organization. In fact, there are 4 levels of organization within the human body. We're going to spend, again, the bulk of our time on that 4th one. But first of all, you have cells. This is, of course, the smallest unit of life. People vary on the estimates here. Usually you'll hear somewhere around 100 trillion cells in the human body. Again, that depends on who you read. There may be a few more, a few less, but there are a lot, suffice it to say. A cell averages less than 1/1000th of an inch in length, but it's extremely complicated. I mean, this smallest unit of life, even that smallest unit, is so complicated. It is more complicated than we can imagine. In fact, just a few things on that. The membrane of the cell, this surrounds the cell on the outside. That cell membrane somehow knows just what to let in to the cell and what to let out as far as waste that the cell produces. How does it know that? How did that evolve? You can't evolve that. You die trying to evolve that, and the species goes extinct. You can't do it. But this cell membrane somehow knows exactly what to let in and exactly what to let out. Inside the membrane, you have cytoplasm, which is itself bustling with activity. Brother Jackson describes it as mini power plants, transportation systems, sewage operations, protective systems, and so on. You know, we could spend an entire lesson talking about the human cell. But again, just suffice it to say, it is amazingly complex itself. And of course, they come in different types. You have blood cells, you have nerve cells, and so on and so forth. So cells come in specific types, but they themselves are very complicated. Concerning the human cell. One evolutionary source, these are two authors, Benjamin Miller and Ruth Good, they confess that no man-made system, quote, however ingenious and efficient, end quote, can match, again quoting, the functions of this single unit of life too small to be seen with the unaided eye, end quote. That's from their book, Man and His Body. Nothing that man can make could even match the complexity, the ingenuity of a single cell, the smallest unit of life. You ever stop and just let that sink in for a minute? With all of our technology and all of our learning accrued over the years, over the centuries, we can't produce something more complex than the single smallest unit of life. That ought to tell us something, folks. Next, you have tissue. Cells of the same type work together and they form tissue. Now again, tissue comes in different types. You have skin tissue, you have muscle tissue, and so on. So there's different types of tissue. And then a cooperative group of tissue forms an organ. You have liver, kidneys, the heart. Of course, some of these overlap some. The heart is an organ, but it's also just a giant muscle. It's one of the or not one of the larger muscles, but it itself is a muscle. But it's also considered an organ. So again, some of these overlap a little bit. But a cooperative group of tissue forms an organ, and these organs, they accomplish different functions within the body. Some of this we'll talk about under systems, and I'll go ahead and bring that up. That's the fourth level of organization, systems. These are organs working together. They form a system, and sometimes it's more than just organs. And so again, you see a little bit of overlap, but you get the idea, and all this will come together as we look at the systems. But here's what I want to say. All of this organization, it just shouts, it screams design. And where there is design, there must be a designer. Design does not happen by accident. It just never ceases to amaze me. It blows my mind that you could take any atheist, any skeptic, any agnostic, any infidel, and they will never walk by a house and that is, this beautiful house or any beautiful structure or even something as simple as a watch or our cell phones or something like that, and they'll never say, that must have just happened. I wonder how long that took to evolve. They know somebody made it because design demands a designer. But then they come to something as complex as the human body, and they say, no, that just evolved. That evolved over millions of years. Folks, give me a break. I'm not that foolish. I'm not the smartest person, but I'm not that dumb. And so there is stunning organization in the human body, but there's also systematized operation. Here's a definition from the Basic Dictionary of Science for system, talking about the human body, a system in the human body. Any group of things or parts working together to give a united effect. All the different structures specially designed to take part in one complex operation or having one purpose. Now, that's a little bit amusing to me because they said a lot more than they intended. Did you catch that? Did you catch what they said? They said, if you look, it's on the, where is it? I just lost my place there. It actually spans the second line onto the third. All the different structures specially designed to take part in one complex operation or having one purpose. If the body's systems are specially designed, folks, who designed them? They said a lot more than they realized or meant to say. The body's systems display remarkable organization and design. We're going to look at that in the next several slides here. The systems within the human body. There are, Brother Jackson mentions 10 of these. He lists 7 in his book. A lot of folks list 11. Some people, depending on how they break it down, they might have 12. Some people might have 10. We're going to break it down into 11. I think that's, to me, looking at it and doing some research, to me, they just break down best into 11 systems. And so I hope I left enough room on your handout there that you can, we may say more than what's actually on the handout, and you may want to write some of that in. It might have to be tiny, but hopefully you've got room to add that if you need to. But I tried my best to get as much on the handout as possible, and that hence the reason for the dual-sided handout. But first you have the integumentary system. These are not in any particular order, by the way. They're just, you you don't have any order of importance or anything like that. They're just, I just tried to put these in an order of the ones that I want to talk more about down to the ones I want to talk least about, I guess. The integumentary system, this will be your skin, your hair, your nails. Brother Jackson lists it in his book as just the skin system, but it also includes hair and nails, so it's a little bit more than that. It actually, there are glands that are secreting oil and things like that, and sweat glands, so it actually could even be considered some of the glands. But anyway, integumentary system, it serves, and this is where I got a little bit different on the handout. It serves as a protective covering for the body. Oh, I wanted to mention this quote here. Within a piece of skin, not a quote, but just a fact here. Within a piece of skin, about the size of a quarter. Brother Wayne mentions this in his book. So about the size of a quarter, just a little piece of skin, about the size of a quarter. You'll have somewhere around 1 yard of blood vessels, somewhere around 4 yards of nerves. That's about 12 feet, of course. 25 nerve ends, 100 sweat glands, and more than 3 million cells. That's just within a piece of skin, about the size of a quarter. But your skin serves as a protective covering. In fact, if you ever get asked in trivia, we used to play a lot of trivia games, and this would come up sometimes. What's the largest organ in the human body? And sometimes you think, well, maybe it's the heart, well, it's actually the skin. The skin counts as an organ. It's the largest organ in the human body. And so that's where I was looking on the handout under number 1 there, A, protective covering. So it serves as a protective covering. Sweat glands cool the body. So right there with that would be cool. Skin cools the body. Sweat glands serve as a built-in air conditioner for your body. Now, you may feel like on a hot day your air conditioner's not doing a very good job. But I can assure you, if you didn't have that, you would know it. And you would really be appreciative of it if that AC went out on you just a little bit for a period of time. And some people have issues with whether it be genetic diseases or things like that will mess with their ability to sweat and cool their body down. But it's a cooling system for the body. There are also oil glands that lubricate the body so that your body has a certain amount of oil within it. But that's all part of this integumentary system. Nerves. Nerves are, I forgot about this. Your skin also holds fluids within the body. This keeps it keeps your blood contained and other fluids, and so it just holds fluids within. It's a covering. But also you have the skin as a shield. It shields interior parts. This goes under that protective covering. Shields your interior parts from the harmful UV rays of the sun. The skin is more equipped to handle that. Your internal organs are not. And so even with the skin, you can get too much and damage it, but you don't want organs exposed to the sun for sure. So again, protective covering. But nerves are warning sensors: cold, heat, pain, and so on. Nerves sense these things. They can tell you if something is very cold. They can tell you if something is very hot. You could get close to something that is hot, and before you even touch it, nerve endings are sending signals to your brain: don't touch that, that's very, very hot. So these are warning systems that are within the body. Also, when cut, skin repairs itself. When your skin gets cut, it repairs itself. Brother Mike, can you imagine if you could tell all your customers, hey, if a tree falls on your roof? Brother Mike puts in roofs. Can you imagine if you could tell your customers if a tree falls on the roof? Don't worry, give it a few days, it'll fix itself. You'd be a rich man if you could sell a roof like that. You might be out of business, though. You wouldn't get called to come back to repair it. No man-made house fixes its own roof, folks. We can't figure out how to make a structure to do that, but God did. That's the integumentary system, just a little small piece of what we could talk about with that. Let's talk about the skeletal system. The average human has 206 bones. Every human has 206 bones. I guess we should say the normal human. Unless you're born with bones that are somehow fused or something like that, or missing a bone or something, then you're going to have 206 bones in the adult body. Now, children have, I think it's a few less because bones will separate. Some are fused and they separate as you're growing, I believe is the way that I did some research on that. But anyway, 206 bones in a normal adult human. Some bones form an inner framework, like wall studs in your house. Some bones are going to provide a protective covering, like your noggin, your skull. It protects the brain. It's a bone, but it's there to provide a protective covering for your brain. This is where I was making sure I'm following the handout. Inner framework there under A, and protective covering. Some bones, I didn't get this on the handout, some bones function as levers in conjunction with muscles. And then, of course, bones also serve a metabolic purpose as well. Minerals like calcium, phosphorus. So there's a lot going on with just the skeletal system. But it's that structural integrity of the body. Let's talk about the muscular system. The muscular system is the body's engine. Your body has over 600 muscles within it. Some of these muscles operate involuntarily. Your heart. You don't have to sit there and think, okay, beat heart, pump the blood through my body. And aren't you glad? What if you forgot about that? You'd be in trouble. But you don't have to think about it. You don't even have to think about breathing. Your lungs are going to operate involuntarily. Some of these, of course, conversely, will operate voluntarily. You can tell the muscles in your hand and arm to work together and set something down. Then you can tell them, I'm going to pick it up. Now, my hand is not going to just reach down involuntarily and grab that PowerPoint clicker and pick it up or put it down. I have to tell my arm, my hand to work together to do that. So that's voluntary. But did you know that some muscles work both ways? Some of them work both ways. You can open your eyes and somebody says blink, and you can blink. But you know what? If you sit there with your eyes open long enough, you don't even have to think about it. You know what they're going to do? They're going to blink. I could sit here and be thinking about science and the Bible, anatomy and physiology. I'm not thinking anything about blinking, but I guarantee you, off and on, I'm going to be blinking. But somebody can say, hey, Chad, blink your eyes, and I can do that. So some muscles work both ways. Isn't that amazing? Same thing with breathing. You don't even have to think about it. You'll breathe, but somebody can say, hold your breath, and you can stop. Or you could breathe faster. Pretty amazing how that is, just within the muscular system. Let's talk about the digestive system. I feel like I'm leaving something out that I wanted to cover. Man, there's so much in this material that is good stuff. Let's talk about the digestive system. Okay, I didn't forget it. I've got it right here. The digestive system processes food to rebuild worn-out cells and also to supply your body with energy. Digestion, by the way, begins the moment you put food in your mouth. Your saliva begins the digestive process. I think this is it. Yes. When it comes to digestion, here's what Miller and Good, we've mentioned them before, Man and His Body, evolutionists, they say we would have to boil our food in strong acids at 212 degrees Fahrenheit to do with cookery what the stomach and intestines do at the body's normal temperature of 98.6 degrees. 212 degrees, strong acids. The body does it at 98.6 degrees. How does that even work? You think that evolved? Are you kidding? Not only that, it is amazing that your stomach, which is made of flesh, and you can go to your favorite steakhouse or Rock House Farms, right? You know, little plug there. You could go to your favorite steakhouse or whatever. You could order a steak and you could eat the steak, which is also made of flesh. And your stomach, made of flesh, will digest the steak, and yet it won't digest itself. Isn't that amazing? Fact is, the stomach's lining is rebuilt around every 3 days or so. You could take the sulfuric acid in your stomach, and it would dissolve. It would just be amazing how strong that acid is, and yet it doesn't burn through the lining of your stomach. Your stomach doesn't digest itself, and yet you can eat meat, you can eat vegetables, fruits, you name it, and it digests that. That, again, that's something that just yells, screams, design. Someone had to design that. Someone had to create that. That cannot simply evolve. It is just amazing just to think of just the digestive system. Well, let's move on. The circulatory system. This is the heart, blood vessels, and other parts of the circulatory system. This takes the nourishment from the digestive system once it's provided that energy, and it circulates it to the various parts of the human body. Of course, the heart itself is a pump with a built-in motor that pumps somewhere around 1,800 gallons a day. Brother Wayne Jackson mentions this in his book, The Bible and Science. The blood is pumped through an astounding pipeline system, arteries, veins, and capillaries, which, if tied end to end, would stretch out for some 60,000 to 100,000 miles. Does anyone believe that the underground pipeline system of San Francisco contrived itself? Only disciples of Darwin are so credulous. We would look at the underground system, of any city, and say, someone designed that, someone made that. And yet you look at the amazing pipeline system that is within the human body, through which blood circulates without you even giving it a second thought. And somebody says, oh, but that evolved. Get real. Get real. There's no way, no how. It could not happen. Again, Miller and Gould, the evolutionists that wrote that textbook, Man and His Body, evolutionary textbook, they said this, quote, it is, talking about the heart, it is hard to imagine a better job of engineering, end quote. And yet they think that just happened. That just evolved. It's unbelievable sometimes to read the statements of these evolutionary people that they will make and then turn around and say, oh, but nobody created that. Nobody designed that. It just happened. Jerry Clower used to say sometimes people get educated beyond their intelligence. I think that happens sometimes, doesn't it? The nervous system. Let's talk about the nervous system. This is your brain, your spinal cord, nerves, and so on. This is the communication center of the human body. Nerves carry messages at something like 450 feet per second. So over 300 miles per hour, that messages are traveling through your body, nonstop at all times. There's so much more we could say just about this. Dr. John Pfeiffer called the nervous system the most elaborate communication system ever devised. Who devised it? Who devised it? The Encyclopedia Britannica says problem solving by a human brain exceeds by far the capacity of the most powerful computer. You see, a computer is only as powerful as its programmer. Garbage in, garbage out, right? That's the old saying in computer programming. If you don't put the right code in, you put garbage in for the code, you get garbage out. It's only as good as the programmer. Who programmed the human mind, the most powerful computer in the world? In fact, in that book I just mentioned, The Human Body, Design or Accident, there you go, that was it, The Human Body, Design or Accident by Wayne Jackson. That booklet, he has a whole section where he talks about sleep. And he quotes from several authors that have said years ago, Ben Franklin, I believe, was one of them, that one of the founding father type people, that he made a statement that in 1,000 years, or he maybe said in 1,000,000 years, humans won't sleep anymore. We will have evolved beyond that. We're evolving to where we need less and less sleep. It's interesting. I wonder what Albert Einstein thought of that. Albert Einstein was known as a heavy sleeper. He slept a lot. One of the greatest geniuses humanity's known, at least in even within our time, even close to our time. But several people that were saying, well, sleep is something left over from evolutionary development. But there's coming a time we won't need sleep anymore. You try going without sleep. They've done experiments. And you know what is interesting about sleep loss, sleep deprivation? You know what it affects the most? The brain. There's no evidence that it makes your muscles weaker, but you function at it just gets exponential the longer you go without sleep. How much lower capacity you function at. Not because your muscles are growing weaker, it's your brain's not functioning right. And the paradox in that is the brain must have sleep. But do you know what they've done studies and they found out? The brain never sleeps. The brain itself will never shut off. But you can take people in a test case. In fact, sometimes it's even used in military situations for interrogation. You may not torture somebody, just don't let them sleep. The guy's trying to go to sleep, you keep him awake. Tell us what we need to know. And sometimes that's even been used, and you begin to just about go crazy. The brain has to have sleep. But they do all these tests, hook people up to these machines, and they've discovered the brain never shuts off and sleeps. Now figure that out. Did it evolve? I'm not that foolish. It was made that way. Let's talk about the endocrine system. This is your thyroid gland, pituitary gland, and so on. The endocrine system, this was one that Brother Jackson didn't cover in his material. Just suffice it to say, the endocrine system, it regulates body processes through the use of hormones. It uses hormones throughout the body to regulate various processes. There's a lot more that you can study, just any of these systems, really. There's so much that could be said. We're just covering them very, very quickly. Then there's the renal system, kidneys, bladder. This filters and removes waste from your blood. In fact, we've actually developed a way now that if someone is having kidney failure, they can go and they can be put on dialysis. And it basically does the kidneys work for them. Now, let me say, it is vastly, vastly inferior to your kidneys. But in a situation where it's that, or your blood becomes poisoned and without being filtered, you will die eventually. Without your kidneys functioning at top capacity, it's better than nothing. But it's nowhere near as efficient as God's version. So it filters and removes waste from the blood. It also helps maintain water balance in the body. This is why sometimes you'll be going to the bathroom more, sometimes less. Sometimes the body's holding on to water. There's a lot of salt in the system. Sometimes you need to go to the bathroom more. It's regulating that water balance. The kidneys, the renal system takes care of that. There's also the respiratory system. This is your lungs, your trachea, and so on. This delivers oxygen to the blood and removes CO2. That's carbon dioxide, of course. If we don't know what CO2 is, as the saying goes, just raise your hand and my friend Jacob will come hit you over the head with a tack hammer because you missed 7th grade science. But CO2, carbon dioxide, right? It removes carbon dioxide from the body. It puts oxygen into your blood. This is what your respiratory system does. It is balancing the oxygen, providing the oxygen and getting rid of the CO2. You inhale the oxygen, you exhale the CO2. You've got to get rid of the CO2. You've got to have the O2 or the oxygen in your blood. Respiratory system takes care of that. It does all that for you, and that's one of those involuntary things you don't even have to think about. Then there's the immune system, lymph nodes, thymus, spleen, so on. The immune system, basically, is just defending your body against harmful pathogenic viruses. This keeps a virus from invading your system. Sometimes some viruses the body can't fight off. Sometimes you need help with that, but this is your body's immune system. It will attempt to fight off these diseases, these viruses. And then, of course, finally, the reproductive system. This consists of sexual organs, of course. Listen, there is no comparable man-made system. We talked about the renal system. Man has come up with a way that it's not as efficient as God's, but we can put someone on dialysis and they can have their blood filtered as the kidneys ordinarily would do. Sometimes if someone loses part of a leg or an arm or something like that, they can devise a prosthetic. It's not quite as good as your actual arm, the muscles, the flesh, the bone, but it will work. And sometimes it will work quite well. Still not as good as the God-given original. All these different things that people can help with. There are medications if you have acid reflux. You got too much acid in your stomach, they can give you some medicine. It'll kind of reduce the acid in your stomach. You could take certain medicine or eat certain foods that could increase the acid if that's what you needed. All these different things. In fact, Brother Jackson mentions in his book, this engineer wrote a book, and he's writing about all the different man-made systems, all the different things that humans have made kind of as a counterpart to these God-given systems. And he's showing each time how the man-made system is not up to par with the God-given system. Many times it's very good if your God-given system is not working properly, but still not quite up to par. But when he gets to the reproductive system, he doesn't say a word. Why? Because there is no comparable man-made system. Man cannot make a machine that reproduces itself. But you know who can and did? God Almighty. He made humans. They can reproduce themselves. Man cannot make a machine that will do that. It is amazing to look at the human system and see that as Brother Jackson put it, well, hold on, I'm going to go to this before I mention that quote. Brother Jackson mentions this he was talking about odds, and the odds of whether you're talking about the reproductive system, so many things that have to happen just right, or the whole thing fails and the species comes to an end. Whether you're talking about that or just any of these systems, scientists many times have this idea, and again, that's why time is the hero of the plot. Give it enough time, and I know the odds are astronomical, but I mean, you give astronomical odds millions and millions of years, and it could happen. And I love what he said. I'm quoting from Brother Jackson's book, The Bible and Science. He said, I once sat in a philosophy class and heard the professor discuss this matter of evolution and odds. He suggested that anything is possible. He speculated that one might hold a shotgun 6 inches from the face of a potential victim and discharge the weapon. He then claimed that it would be mathematically possible that none of the shot would strike the target. He did not volunteer, of course, to demonstrate his theory. Yeah, it's easy to say things like that. Oh, anything's possible. Those are long odds, but anything's possible. But we understand there are things that cannot, will not, ever happen on their own. This design in the human body cannot and will not ever happen merely on its own. Let's go on to point number 3 here and talk about the symphonic operation, the harmony of the human body. This is a very short point, just to kind of tie all this together with those systems. Just to point out a few of these. Now, this is not looking at every single system, but just to make the point that without the digestive system, you cannot process your food for nourishment, right? If you don't have the digestive system, it doesn't matter how much food you eat, you're going to get no nourishment from it. It has to be processed. It has to be broken down so that your body can use it as nourishment. But if you take away the circulatory system, it doesn't matter how well your digestive system is working because it can't reach the remote parts of the body. But if you take away the nervous system, the circulatory system doesn't know where to send it. There's no direction there. And of course, on top of all this, if you don't have the skeletal system, the body has zero structural integrity. That gives us the ability to stand, to be upright, and to have that structural integrity. So you see how the systems are all interdependent. You can't have one system evolving while the others are still very early in development, and maybe one's moving along right well, but here's this other one is way early in development. No, they cannot evolve, folks. It cannot be. They have to all be finished, fully working right there together. Otherwise, you don't have life. You don't have human life as we know it. They're so interdependent. Again, from Brother Jackson's book, he says each system of the human body is an absolute wonder itself. Even more astounding is how they work together in such beautiful harmony, like a grand symphony orchestrated by a master composer. Indeed, there was a master composer. I will give thanks unto you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Psalm 139:14. There's a master composer. His name is Jehovah. The body works together so perfectly, so precisely. There cannot be any possible way it simply evolved. There's just no way. And then finally, wanted to mention this, again, kind of a quick point, but the squabbling over oddities. I wanted to keep my alliteration going there. But this is basically, people sometimes, just to kind of sum up this point, atheists will argue that, well, if the body was designed by God, there would be no flaws. There'd be no flaws. You creationists, you want to say God designed the body. Well, how come there are flaws in the body? And so they'll say things like that. Say, well, you'd think if an almighty God designed the body, he could have done so without flaws. But there are several things to remember. Number one, let me mention this. In that section, that book, The Human Body Design or Accident, there's a pretty good little section on this where he talks about the atheist. I get this guy confused. Stephen Hawking, I believe. Is that the one that died recently? Is that the fellow that died? I get him and Richard Dawkins confused. It's one of those two. I don't know why, but I mix those names up every time I mention something that involves one of them. I should have written it down and I wouldn't have forgotten. But Anyway, I want to say it was Stephen Hawking. He really went into this rant and actually within a book talked about the fact that the human eye is wired backwards, is how he put it. The human eye is wired backwards. In fact, you've probably heard a lot of people defending creationism talk about the human eye and what a masterpiece it is. That's another one of those. We've duplicated it, right? On a much inferior scale. I mean, we have cameras, we have video cameras, we have still cameras. We've duplicated the eye, but we've not even come, within the same vicinity of close to what God has created. But he says the human eye is wired backwards. And if an almighty creator made that, you'd think he would have gotten it right. And it's not the way any tidy engineer would have done it. That's the way he put it. But there was another fellow from New Zealand. I can't recall his name either, but he mentions this in the book. There's another fellow from New Zealand that this was kind of his specialty. So he began to do some research. And what he discovered is that, yes, the eye is wired backwards. But there were major benefits to it being wired so, created so. In fact, he began, as Brother Jackson puts it, he took Mr. Hawking to the proverbial woodshed and showed that the eye could not have evolved that way. It had to have been created in such a way that we would look at it and say it's reverse wired, but it actually was done on purpose because it's better that way, better than any human would ever have thought to have created it. And he's got more in his book about that, of fairly detailed sections. Pretty fascinating, actually. I encourage you to read it when you get a chance. But this idea about flaws, arguing against a designer, let's talk about that. There are several things to remember. We're just going to look at three here. Number one, understand some features of the body simply may not be fully understood. You know what people used to talk about all the time when it came to the human body as evidence for evolution? Vestigial organs, vestigial organs. These are leftovers from evolution. And you know what one of the number one vestigial organs they would talk about was? Your appendix. You don't have to have that. That's just leftover from evolution. Doesn't have a function. And so, if you start having appendicitis, get rid of that thing. You don't need it anyways. Now, you may have outdated textbooks, but the more updated ones, they kind of went quiet on that. You know why? Because you do need your appendix. Can you live without it? Yeah. You can live without one of your kidneys. How many of us are raising our hands saying, hey, come take one of mine? Just because you can live without something doesn't mean it doesn't have a function. Just because we don't understand everything that it does doesn't mean that it doesn't do anything. So some features of the body simply may not be fully understood, just like with the eye. Oh, it's reverse wired. That shows it was not designed. It had to have evolved that way. Nope. It actually shows quite the opposite the more you study this. Number two, the Bible plainly teaches humanity has suffered a degenerative effect, a degenerative process as a result of sin. Sin entered this world, and the world's not been the same ever since. Romans 5:12 talks about this, Romans 8:18 and following. Simply put, we are not what we used to be. Whether you're talking about the planet, or whether you're talking about the species, the human species, we're not what we used to be. That's the degenerative process of sin. And so are there flaws? Yes. Not necessarily designed that way. And going right with this is number three. A machine may still evidence design, even though some parts are broken. A watch still demands a watchmaker, even though it may not be keeping time quite as accurately as it once did. Does that mean that it just evolved just because it's a little bit off from where it used to be? No. It still evidences design. Folks, there can be no doubt the human body, it is simply a masterpiece of design. This next quote here comes from a book called The ABCs of the Human Body. It was published by Reader's Digest Association, which Reader's Digest Association has kind of been known to promote Darwinism and evolution. But here's what this book says. When you come right down to it, the most incredible creation, did you hear that? The most incredible creation, again, I think they said more than they intended to. When you come right down to it, the most incredible creation in the universe is you. The body is a structural masterpiece, more amazing than science fiction. And as Brother Jackson says, it took a creator to produce the creation and a master to produce the masterpiece. As David put it in Psalm 8, verse 4, what is man that thou art mindful of him? God has been mindful of us. In fact, he demonstrates his love toward us in that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. Romans 5:8. The Lord has been mindful of you. And so the question as we close out tonight, are you mindful of him? He's been mindful of me. Am I mindful of him? One day I'm going to stand before him. I'm going to give an account. All these different things that we've studied, they tell us over and over again, there is a creator, an almighty creator. He doesn't want to be distant and apart from you and from me. He wants us to be united with him spiritually, and he wants us to be united with him literally one day in heaven. If you're not a Christian, you can come, confess him as Lord, give your life to him, submit to his authority, be immersed in water, have your sins washed away, and raised as a new creature with a fresh start. If you are a Christian but you're not where you need to be spiritually, you can get that, you can make that right with the Lord. Maybe you just need prayers for strength, for encouragement. But may we never forget, as David said, I will praise thee, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. The Lord has been mindful of you and me. Let's make sure that we're mindful of him. If we can help you in any way in getting right with God, won't you come as we stand and sing?